What's up, Dead Drawers? Darrin here, and welcome to a special edition of the Deaddrawgaming podcast. Today, I am here with Ryan Turner, and we are going to talk about something super special that he has put together for us today, and that is how to practice efficiently, how to make the most out of your practicing, and how to get to the next level competitively with just how you practice the game. So, first of all, Ryan, how are you doing?
Oh, doing fantastic, man. Get my hot tea, get chilled in, ready to do some schooling.
Heck yeah, okay. Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what we're talking about today, and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
All right, so yeah, I guess I'll start with the introduction of myself. I am a competitive player back from the SP era, 2011, 2012. Kind of went on a big hiatus after that, due to just some life and job situations. And so now I've gotten back into the game at a very competitive level towards the beginning of the summer of 2017. And that kind of leads me into the topic of tonight that I want to talk about is I've had to develop strategies and utilize other ideals outside the game and apply them to myself, trying to get back into the game on how to, I guess, the best practices of practicing. And the point that I really want to make tonight is to practice intentionally as a player. And that's something I've had to remind myself on a daily basis. What's the best use of my time in practice? How can I get better the fastest, especially getting back into the game? So I think the point of my talk tonight is going to be directed to newer players or to players that are like me at a point to where they had trying to reintroduce themselves to the game, get acclimated again, or even to players that have been around for a while and maybe they're not using their time that they're investing into the game as efficiently as they can.
Awesome. That sounds amazing to me. I was a very casual competitive player for a while, and I think if I had practiced intentionally, I could have become, probably much more successful than I was. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, and I think a lot of our listeners are going to be in the same boat. They want to hear what it takes to be a competitive player at a higher level. So to start off, where would you like to start with today's main topic?
So tonight I'm going to talk about a few different specific things as far as, specific things that you can do in your practice applying to Pokemon. But again, the overarching theme of tonight is going to be to practice intentionally. And I want to take that principle and for all the listeners to apply that to everything in life outside of Pokemon as well.
Ooh, nice.
It's basically taking the principle of being efficient and effective, and I'm going to say it a lot tonight, but intentional about everything that you do, because you get so much more out of it. And you have to put a lot less into whatever it is you're focusing on if you do it in a very efficient manner. And if you're very conscientious about what you're doing. All right. So I guess the first topic I want to get into is, especially for newer players and people that are trying to keep up with the meta, invest your time into not only physical playing, when you're learning the game, of course, that's a huge factor, but also you need to invest your time in videos, articles, basically seek out high-level players that are putting out content and study that. Because especially for me, one of the biggest things in getting me back up to speed on the game was just, watching YouTubers, streamers, reading as many articles as I can, and just basically digesting all the information I could in my spare time. And without even touching a deck, I could sit down and pretty well figure out what my opponent was playing, the sequences of moves that I should do with my own deck, because I've watched other people play it, other high-level people play it, and that's time that I didn't have to invest in learning that deck because I watched somebody else do it for me.
Nice. So that was kind of a shortcut, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's Again, if someone is doing the work for you, then why not let them and reap the benefits from the time that they're putting in to create these decks, to learn how to pilot them. And I mean, if they're going on Twitch or YouTube or whatever and showing off how to play it, then why not learn from the people that are investing the time to teach you that.
And I think that's a really good point right there. That's why a lot of article sites charge a subscription fee, because it is valuable content that they are providing, and so those content providers deserve some compensation. On the flip side, our website's all free articles. That's nice, right?
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, there's pros and cons to all of it, and I mean that's definitely a topic for another time, because I know there's some hard feelings about paywalls and things like that on Facebook. But
sure.
I do agree that some of the best content you're going to see is the things behind paywalls, because even with me, I have decks and archetypes that I've invested hundreds of hours into, and while it's it's nice to get a little something back from that. So I totally understand the whole paywall thing, and incentivizing content creators to put out more content. So getting back on the topic about the videos and articles, when you're watching a high level player or whoever it is playing a deck through Twitch or YouTube or whatever format it is, even if they're not specifically speaking on what they're doing during their turn, during the game, maybe they're just interacting with the chat room. What I want you to do is actually, if you have to, mute the stream, put on your own music, whatever you need to get into the zone, and just watch what the streamer is doing. Because a lot of times they're going to make moves such as like when they discard certain cards with an Ultra Ball, or they trade a certain card with the Zoroark that you may not, in your own mind, think is a efficient or correct play. But then as you see the span of the game or the game span out, you, as a newer player, you don't always realize those simple moves that add up over the course of a game and can affect the outcome. So one of the best ways that I've learned to get my edge back is to watch these high level players do what they do and try to figure out why they're doing it, even though, again, they may not be speaking specifically on it. But if you're intentionally watching what they do, and trying to figure out in your own head their process, their thought process, then that's going to help you when you're in that situation or when you're piloting that deck to know what to do.
I like that a lot. So go into a video, a stream, and instead of going there for entertainment, go in there to specifically watch actions and choices and evaluate why those are happening. That's part of that intentional thing that you're talking about. That's not something most people do. That's not something I do when I watch a competitive video, and it makes a lot of sense that it would help a lot to experience something like that. Very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you said is it hits a nail on the head, is you're not there for entertainment. And again, this topic tonight is directed towards people that want to get more competitive about their game. I do want you to have fun playing the game, honestly. I mean, obviously that should be the number one priority. But if you're looking to get that next competitive level or to gain more of an edge, when you're investing your time into getting better, you need to realize that you're not there for entertainment when you're watching somebody stream or some videos or reading an article or playing PTCGO games.
Mm-hmm.
You need to consciously decide to turn that time that you're investing into whatever that content is. You need to decide to get something out of it, or else it's just going to be, you're going to look at your clock and 30 minutes have gone by. You've watched the video and you don't really know what happened the last 30 minutes. You just kind of watch somebody play Pokemon.
Yeah.
And that does nothing for your game. So I do that plenty of times too, watch some competitive videos for an hour. And then if you want to chill back and, have some Pokemon playing on your second monitor or whatever, then by all means do that. But just make sure you set aside time to specifically focus on getting something out of the content that you're consuming.
I love it.
I think that was a good primer, just realizing that physically practicing isn't the only form of practice. So now I want to get into the act of physically practicing. Um, and the first thing that I want to talk about is I know towards notorious now. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, moving on from not actually physically picking up cards to practice, but to move into actually playing out hands on PTCGO to physically playing the cards. Some best practices for that. And the first thing I want to talk about is grinding. And I know that Tord is quite popular for this now that he, put in something like 500 games into his Glossopod Zorark build. I'm sure between him and Benjamin Martinson, it's even more than that. And I want to say that while that is, if you have the time and you have that kind of dedication and commitment, then by all means, grinding games can be very beneficial. But I am definitely more in the camp of that it can be also a great waste of your time. Again, going back to what we talked about with consuming entertainment and content in your time, when you're grinding games, that can also be basically another form of entertainment if you're not, again, intentional and conscious about what you're doing and the time you're investing. If I'm sitting there from across from a friend of mine and we're just grinding out games of Pokemon, um, and then again, if I don't keep like a pencil and a piece of paper or a computer, something beside me, and I'm not intentionally, writing down things that are happening in the game. Like, okay, this card wasn't as good as I thought it would be. Maybe I should have retreated here instead of here in this situation, and things like that. If I'm not, keeping track of that, if I'm not investing my mind into what's going on in front of me, then again, 2 hours are going to go by, and I look back and I can't remember half of what happened in a game.
I think I'm exactly the same way. If I'm just playing games, I will not remember the minutia. I won't remember that I discarded 2 energy to retreat, and then 6 turns later I'm out of energy. It's
Yeah.
when it comes to managing resources and handling time on the clock, keeping notes and really paying attention to every action you make can definitely make a difference, I would think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes a world of difference, and it helps get in the habit too of if you want to be a player where you keep track of everything that's going on in the game in a live competitive setting. It helps to train your brain into spotting those things and to picking up on what's in your deck, what's not in your deck faster, and being able to to write it down in the middle of a game and stay focused on what's going on in front of you. It really helps to get you into that mindset. And going back to grinding games, especially on PTCGO, I know it's very easy. If you're just chilling in your room, just playing some games, and basically you're trying to get the feel for a deck, it's very easy to fall into that entertainment mindset. You're lounged back. There's not somebody in front of you encouraging you to stay focused. So again, put on some jams, whatever you need to that keeps you focused. And between every game, remind yourself before you go into it, as the screen's loading, to say, hey, okay, I'm gonna get this and this and this out of the game, or say I want to see my deck do this specific thing, and this is going to be my goal in this match to achieve this, whatever this is, and actively try to accomplish those goals in every game that you play. And again, keep a pen or pencil beside you, or do some sticky notes on your computer and write down what you felt was good, what you felt was bad in your deck, with the matchup that you're playing against. Do the same thing that you would in person. Do it for PTCGO as well. And one thing I actually like to do when I'm playing PTCGO, and especially if I'm trying to get a feel for a new archetype or a deck that I'm working on, like with my Bulu Silvally Zoroark deck that's been running around lately. Um, what I would do in between games online, or while the screen was loading, I would actually be doing test hands, um, to where I actually have the physical deck on my desk, and in between games, or while it's loading, I'll draw out 7 cards. I'll play the first 2 or 3 turns, and then I'll just do that over and over and over again. And what that does is it actually gives me a feel for the deck on how it sets up the first 2 or 3 turns of the game, which are arguably some of the most important for decks. And at the same time, I'm getting in my actual games online, playing full games. So it kind of mitigates the amount of time that I have to put in if I'm just trying to get a feel for how a deck's going to set up. And I'm also seeing how that same deck plays out over the course of a game. So I'm accomplishing 2 goals at the same time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. I really like your concept of making your deck do one thing on PTCGO rather than focusing on finding some way to win, especially if you're playing against something weird like, I don't know, like an Audino Snorlax Aerodactyl deck. Like, obviously that's not competitive, but you can still get something competitive out of it by just trying to make your deck set up in 2 or 3 turns, right? Or just trying to, make it so that you hit 3 prizes taken in 3 turns, Rather than focusing on just winning the game, trying to hit goals with your deck can be a really useful thing to do with PTCGO.
Yeah, exactly. And doing test hands, just solitaire hands by yourself helps to determine the ability of your deck to set up, which again is, if you can't set up, you can't play the game. So your deck needs to do that at a base level. And this way, if you're doing that while you're playing full games, you don't have to devote so many games just to figure out if your deck can even set up first 2-3 turns. And actually, what you said about the Snorlax Aerodactyl takes me into my next point. This is directed a little more towards either newer deck builders or just newer players in general. I know that sometimes you find a crazy combo that sounds like if it just goes off, it'll be awesome. Snorlax Aerodactyl, I don't know, whatever else you want to throw in there. If you can just combo 6 or 7 different cards together, you'll win the game. And it sounds really strong, but don't do it. If you're trying to get to that next competitive level, I don't want you to invest your time in trying to figure out new things, because all these high level pro players and things in these other pro teams, they have this circle and network of other players that are bouncing ideas constantly off of each other. They're investing a lot of time into figuring out the best decks, and not only the best decks, but what is the most efficient version of that deck and the most competitive version.
I can attest to that. I'm in our pro team chat, and it's constant. It is a nonstop barrage.
Yeah, because as much as you think as a solo person chilling by yourself in the room that you found the next big thing, like these other teams and these other players have probably already found it and considered it and tested it and found that it doesn't work. I'm not trying to discourage people from trying to find new things or to build new archetypes, because it does work sometimes, But again, I'm just approaching this from a standpoint of, I want you to be as efficient and effective with your time as possible to get you to that next level that you want to be at. And trying to find new stuff is not how you're going to achieve that.
So I think that's a great thing to say, especially for new players, because a new player wants to come in, and especially on the local level, maybe they want to prove themselves, like, oh, I'm great at this game, I know what I'm doing, and you absolutely might know what you're doing, and you might be a great player, but you're coming in as a new player, and you want to prove yourself with a completely rogue deck, because that's always the local legend's dream, right? To
Yep.
make their own deck, and in their city or in their state, they're known for that one crazy deck, right? That they always win with. That is insanely rare. What you're saying, as a new player, if you want to be successful, you're better off trusting the pro players and starting where they left off. Taking their hard work and molding it into your own thing over time.
Exactly, a great point I was trying to make. Yeah, I guess that's kind of everything I want to say about getting my point across with grinding games.
Right.
Is that again, it can be effective, but I think there are more efficient ways to use that time. And again, be intentional and conscientious about the time that you're putting in to those games. If grinding is what you need to do, then do it. But there are other things that you can do, or other things that you can accomplish while um, you're achieving whatever goals you're trying to achieve in those grinding sessions. The next thing I want to talk about is actually some benchmarks for determining even what to practice. Because as a newer player, you don't necessarily know what's going to be the best use of your time, or as a player that's again trying to get the next level, you don't quite know like what exactly is the best thing to invest your time into.
Right.
So again, coming from the standpoint of a newer player, I guess the first thing you need to determine is can you even afford a particular deck? You go online, you see what's popular, see what's good, you pick out the top 3 decks in the meta. You've read your articles, you watched your videos, you know what you want to play. But unfortunately, money is a constraint sometimes. So, can you afford the deck? If yes, then cool. I would recommend trying to get it online first. If you have more digital copies of cards, get a feel for it there before you invest in physical cards. But if you don't have the money to invest in the physical cards, then I would recommend not investing the time online to even learn the deck. Because again, if this is a strong archetype that is a popular in the meta, um, you do need to learn how to play against it. But again, you can watch. There's so much content and videos out there that you can get a sense of the people that are piloting these decks, what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve, what their win conditions are, and again, put it down on your pen and paper, and so that way, when you go against that deck, how it's going to run, what you need to do against it, even though you don't necessarily get to play it yourself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay,
One of the
cool.
main reasons that I fell in love with Night March so much is because it's such a cheap deck. In
Yeah,
its heyday,
yeah,
it was still extremely cheap, even when Shaman were $45 a piece. Now Shaman are $15 on average, or less. I mean,
yep.
so if you're interested in playing expanded, which is very daunting for new players, I understand. Night March is one of the cheapest good decks that you can pick up. For standard, it's a little steeper. If you want to be competitive, you're going to have to pick up 3 to 4 Tapu Lele GX, which it's a hit to the pocketbook, but
Mhm.
you'll use them in every deck that you make going forward.
Yeah, you definitely will, and that is a a daunting barrier to entry for a lot of new players in standard, um, or Tapu Leles and things like that. But once you get those core support Pokemon and supporters and things like that, the good thing is you can reuse them in most decks.
Absolutely.
Um, but for standard, if anybody's wondering, I would probably recommend, especially after Ultra Prism releases. I believe Greninja is going to get a little more consistent and a little better than it is now, and that's
Ooh,
actually a very cheap. Well, it's a much more affordable deck than a lot of others are. That still has a good place in the meta.
I totally agree.
Cool. So if you can't afford a deck, don't invest time into it. If you kind of rely on borrowing decks from other people, I would kind of recommend uh, trying to focus on one yourself that you can build, because you never know when your friends are going to need to use the deck themselves in a tournament, and you might have invested a lot of time into learning it, and next thing you know, you don't even get to play it. So I don't recommend that approach as well. And going into the next point of when determining what to practice is approach it from a theoretical standpoint, as in, does the deck of your choice beat either the first and second best decks in format, but possibly loses to everything else? Does it beat everything else in format, but probably loses to the best deck? Or C, does it have a pretty even chance across the board? Say something like Glissobod Zoroark, or Lycanroc Zoroark. Something in the range of like a 45-55 chance to 60-40 at best. And I would recommend that if the deck that you're looking at doesn't fit into one of these categories, don't invest your time into it. It's not worth it, because if it can't reach one of those criteria, then you're wasting your time. You're not using it as effectively as you can. And usually this is a case of you're trying to build an untested archetype, or you're trying to invest time in improving a known archetype, for the current meta, which is a good thing. But again, invest that time outside of the time that you're trying to practice and improve your game currently. All right, so after you've determined the theoretical performance of your deck, whether it's a known archetype or not, determine how difficult that deck is to play or learn. Again, you can get a sense of that off of YouTube videos, articles, trying to be active in, Hey Fonte or Verbank on Facebook, or just talking to people in person. Say, hey, if you see somebody playing Volcanion, to say, hey, how difficult is that deck to pilot? Is it pretty, self-explanatory? Does it kind of run itself? Are there a whole lot of moving parts? And try to determine for yourself how difficult of a learning curve a deck like that has. Or I guess something like a Zoroark variant would be a better example, because you're having to make a choice every turn of what do you trade away to draw 2 cards if you're using this trade ability. If you discard the wrong thing at the wrong time, that could cost you the entire game. Again, it creates that snowball effect. And if you don't know how to pilot that deck as efficiently as you would, say, something like a Volcanion deck, then I would say you're probably wasting your time if you're trying to practice the thing that you're best with leading up to a tournament. And I would say, yeah, if you're going into a tournament in like 3 days and you haven't practiced, say, Decidueye, don't play it. That's going to be a waste of all the time that you've invested in a deck that you do know. And it's just not generally a wise decision. Your performance is usually going to be poor, and you're probably not going to come out very happy at the end of that day.
I see that a lot when people will go to a tournament or they'll be going to a tournament soon and they just can't pick a deck. They're just waffling all the way up to it, and then the night before or the day of, they pick the one. Or they pick one completely out of the blue, and then they end the day going 1-3 drop,
Yeah. And a lot of people try to determine, I know that like a lot of pros and high level players do that. And and a lot of newer players think that because these high level players do that they can. And the fact is that usually most of the time you can't. These high level players have been playing the game for a long time, or they've, again, invested their time into learning the game and these decks, and they can switch back and forth at a moment's notice and play a specific archetype just as well as they could another. But most players can't do that at a high level, especially if you're taking my advice on all the other points and you're investing your time efficiently and effectively into something that you want to play that you think is strong, or that you're trying to improve yourself on. Don't throw all that away the night before a tournament. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing the time that you've invested in what you've been trying to learn a disservice by handicapping yourself, basically, by playing something that you don't know, that you did not invest the time into. All right, so the third point that I want to make in determining what to practice and invest your time in is the deck as consistent as you want it to be? Throughout your practice, as you're doing your test hands, as you're grinding out games, as you're playing with your friends, is the deck setting up? Because again, like I said earlier, if your deck doesn't set up, you can't even play the game. So there's no point. What I mean is, especially for a major tournament, over the course of 9 rounds, can the deck that you're investing into do what it needs to do to win? If potentially it can't, you need to determine if the power of the deck compensates for that. I think a pretty good example is probably Gardevoir. It was the best deck in format for a while, and insanely strong if it once it got set up. And sometimes the decks that you would lose, or the matches that you would lose, are the ones where you just kind of floundered setting up because it is a stage 2 deck. But just the inherent power of that card and that archetype was so strong that it completely outweighed the disadvantage of it being a stage 2 deck, because usually it can come back. Even if it doesn't set up, it can make a huge comeback with huge knockouts for very little investment. So I think that's a pretty perfect example of, can the deck set up over the course of, best of 3 games over 9 rounds? No, probably not. But it's so strong when it just gets, 1 or 2 of its main attackers out that it compensates for that. And so just, again, determine, is your deck that you're going to invest the time into worth it? And then, okay, so the last point I want to make about determining what to practice is, as you're putting in, as you're reading articles, as you're watching videos, as you're putting in, a little bit of time into these different decks, everybody at the end of the day kind of has a style of play or a style of deck that they tend to gravitate towards. And I would say definitely start with a deck that suits your style of play. And when I say style, I also kind of clump in ability as well. That kind of goes back to the difficulty of a deck. Because just naturally, if a deck fits your style a little more, you can make decisions a little bit better when you're more comfortable. It puts you in a more comfortable mental state because of the style of the deck that you enjoy playing. I guess what I'm trying to say is, look at the best decks in the meta, find the ones that you enjoy playing, test those decks, and if they do well against the other top 2 or 3 decks in the format, then awesome. Take that and run with it, because it's probably going to be your best chance, because you enjoy playing it. It fits your style, and again, it puts you in a lot more comfortable mental state than if you go into a tournament playing a deck that's very strong, that you've practiced a lot with, but maybe it still kind of throws you off. Again, a good example is Zorok variants. A lot of people still very uncomfortable with what to trade, when to trade it. Is it best to do it before the Sycamore, after the Sycamore? Or like, if I throw away my field blower now, is it gonna bite me later in the game? And that kind of puts you in the back foot, and you haven't even played anything yet. It's just the nature of the deck itself. You have to be very comfortable in your decision making, in your play, and in your play style to play something like that. So if a different archetype is stronger or just as strong, and you're more comfortable playing it, then I would recommend investing your time in that.
I really like that. Throughout my TCG life, I've always played aggro. In Magic, I'd play red and black. Other games, I almost always played red. And then you get to Pokemon, and my first deck that I did well with was Night March. And so I've just always been into turbo decks. Like, I love Rayquaza, and I just anything that's quick and can hit hard. Glass cannons, that's always been my play style. And even when Night March wasn't B-Diff, like I played Night March at Madison Regionals. Before Lysander's Trump Card got banned. That was the last tournament before Lysander's Trump Card got banned.
Okay.
So I played 6 or 7 Seismitoad variants where you just play your whole deck every turn, and then Lysander's Trump Card. It wasn't very fun. I did a lot of Mew EX uses Quaking Punch, but
feels bad having a little guy out front.
But like, it's just, that's a great point. Like, even though the deck wasn't great, or wasn't maybe the top pick, because it was my play style, I probably did better with it. I guarantee I was more comfortable with it, and I ended the day, obviously not great because I'm just not very good at the game, but but I think I ended up with 3 wins, 2 losses, and 3 ties.
Mm-hmm.
This was back when tournaments weren't 5,000 people.
Right. That actually is a good point that I want to get into. You mentioned ties. But first, let me take a step back here.
All right.
You talked about how you realize that aggro is like your style of play, and I remember reading an article by Finnegan Lynch on his site that basically he said he was playing Gliscod Zoroark at a tournament and realized that halfway through it didn't quite fit. He wasn't comfortable playing it. He's a fantastic player. But again, those micro decisions of what to throw away when and things like that, he didn't have enough time invested into the deck to really learn and know. And I remember him writing on that article that he's very much, he would, if he could go back, he would have picked a much more aggressive deck that just sweeps the board. If it sets up, or certain matchups, it just stomps certain matchups, but gets stomped right back by others. That's his style of play, and he excels a lot more with what he called like a shotgun style deck. It's super good up close in certain matchups, but then it just comes out weak in others. Rather than playing something like Gliscod Zoroark that has a 50-50 matchup across the entire board, if you play it right and if you play it perfectly. So yeah, that was actually a great comparison that you made. And again, something that I think players that are trying to get to that next competitive level need to realize that, like, yes, to get to the top tier level, you do need to be able to play any archetype at any given time and be able to know the matchups, know like what's best when in certain situations, with certain decks. But until you get to that point, invest your time in something that you're comfortable with and that's strong. And then eventually we'll get you to the point of being able to play those or to be that player that can, pick a deck the night before and play it, or that can pick an aggro deck and then go into a control style deck the very next tournament and be just as good with it. And I think, Ari, if you take these points I'm trying to make tonight and really intentionally apply them, that you'll get to that level a lot faster than otherwise not doing it. So
now that we're kind of wrapping things up, I've got a couple questions for you. First of all, we were talking about getting in depth, being super cognizant of your practice time. That can be mentally draining. How much time per day would you? I'm sure everyone's different, but like, how much time do you personally put into this very active style of applied practicing?
Yeah. So for me, I've lately I've been kind of in between jobs. I've had a little extra time during the day to invest, but I'll say on a normal day, if I had a 9 to 5 and I came home and needed to get in my practice for a competition coming up or whatever, I would say probably a couple hours a day. But that's my personal choice. I would say if you take the points that I'm making tonight and apply them, you could easily do a 30-minute session. You could take one game at a time. Again, the point I'm trying to make is the amount of time that you put in does, if you follow these practices well, then the idea is to take those 2, 3, 4 hours a night or a week or whatever it is, and to be able to condense all that down into a minimum amount in and a maximum amount out that you're going to get from your time that you're putting in.
Cool. Next question. So when we're talking about practicing, I know this happens a lot with me, and I've seen it when I was competitive. A lot of people like to cram a huge practice night in right before a major tournament. What are your thoughts on consistent daily, like maybe half hour to hour practicing versus not practicing daily, maybe only practicing every other day, and then having a huge cram session, like 10-hour session the day before a tournament? Like what's the comparison there? Which one do you think is better?
Better, I would say consistent. Consistent, consistent, but smaller amounts of time invested. Just because, again, I think a lot of players that cram it in the night before that are successful are very high level players that have been in the game for a long time. And again, they know how to pilot everything. They know what to expect, and they don't have to necessarily keep up with the meta. Yeah, I guess keeping up with the ever changing meta, because they're always up to date on it, if that makes sense. Because going back to earlier, these more established players have networks of other people that are constantly feeding them information, keeping them up to date, things like that. So for the average player, I would not recommend investing all your time, the night before, or 2 nights before. Just give it, 30 minutes a day. Just if that's all you have time, that's plenty. Um, and when you can consume content, again, that's probably the best way to improve initially, and to catapult you to the next level, is to consume as much content as you can in your free time, and consume it well.
Nice. Nice. Well, I guess my last question for you is what tournaments are you playing in personally for the rest of this season?
The rest of the season, let's see. I've had the unfortunate luck or bad play, one of the two, of of bubbling out of every regional I've been to this year.
Oh,
So
no.
yeah, usually I've been one tie away every time from day two. But anyways, that just means I got to play more coming up. So
Right.
pretty much everything.
Are
I'm
you
gonna
going
miss
to
Dallas.
Dallas?
No, I'm actually I got my ticket, or my admission, but I'm gonna have to bail on that, because,
Oh,
like I said, I'm
no.
in between jobs at the moment, so I'm actually got a couple interviews lined up
Okay.
for end of that week. So I'll be I need to get a job first so I can afford to keep playing Pokemon.
Of course. Of course.
So,
Well, I mean, so you've got
uh,
Oregon, you've got Salt Lake, right? Those are coming up?
yep, yep, going to Oregon with a fellow DDG amateur, Cameron Chinoy.
Ooh, I
So
like Cameron.
we'll be, yeah. He's all right. He's all right. Yeah, but yeah, he's a good dude, and so we'll be heading up there together. Um, if he's down, we'll probably go to Salt Lake as well, and then I think there's one in Southern California also.
Okay.
So I'll be going to that, and I'm actually going to try to go to Charlotte as a standard tournament in a couple months in Charlotte, and
Eh,
hit that up, and then definitely Madison.
Definitely Madison, because that's
Yep,
the one
yep,
I'll be at for sure.
yep. I'll be there.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Do you have any other last thoughts? Any parting words for us?
Oh yeah, so there's actually one final point relating to practice that I'd like to make, if that's cool, and hopefully this will be a bit of encouragement for all the listeners out there. And we're gonna get a little bit of deep, get a little deep here for a moment. During and after all my years as a touring musician and competitive gamer, I kind of came to realize that there's always been someone better than me at what I did. Especially during my time in Nashville. I lived in Nashville for a little bit during my stint as a musician, and I mean, there's somebody better on every corner of every block, in that city. So I'm sure many of our listeners have come to that same realization, not just about Pokemon, but I mean anything else in life, really. Um, and I just wanted to talk on. I realized that for some people, that this idea is a great motivator for them in their game, and a way to push themselves to want to be better than their peers and to reach the top. And that's a big motivator for practicing. And they can take all the points that I've made tonight and again make their practice more efficient to get that to that point faster. Um, and to basically, this is their driving force to be willing to put in the time it's going to take for them to be successful, whatever their definition of success is when it comes to Pokemon. Now, if that's not you, if you're out there listening and that's not the kind of person that you are, and that thought of there being always going to be somebody better than you, um, if that scares you or discourages you, or even sort of hinders you in your game, um, I was actually briefly in that same boat back in my music career and with my gaming career as well. Um, but then I came to this realization, and this goes for people in the first category as well, is that at the end of the day, the point of uh, yeah, the whole point of investing time into learning and practicing and learning how to practice well. It's not to become the best at what you do. It's really to find and grow and mold yourself to become the best version of yourself at what you do. Does that make sense? I know
Absolutely.
it's kind of abstract, but it's the point is not to be the best of the best. It's to be the best version of yourself. And I believe that, again, if you're the kind of person that whole idea scares you or inhibits you in any way, I believe that if you internalize this thought, um, then those thoughts in your head of, why bother doing all this practicing and putting all this time in when I'm just going to lose all the time anyways? Or what's the point when Michael Pramwatt is just going to stomp me and win another regionals anyways? So I think thoughts like that hold a lot less power and weight when you're walking into the next tournament and you know that you did everything you could to be prepared for that tournament, or for that life event outside of Pokemon. The fact that you chose to invest time into getting better at something that you love and to become the best version of yourself, in that moment, then you can hold your head high, whether you won the whole tournament or if you flopped. Because if you did flop, which happens to everybody, um, you'll be in the mindset of that's an entire day of new information about yourself and about your game that you've now acquired, and it's an opportunity to grow even more in your game and in your pursuit to become better at whatever it is that you're doing. Because honestly, there's no better practice and no better teacher than defeat. It feels bad. It feels really bad, but it's going to happen, and it's probably going to happen a lot. But just keep sticking to the practices that I've talked about tonight. And again, you'll get to the point. If you can internalize the idea of defeat isn't a bad thing, and utilize these principles, then you're going to get to your goal and you're going to get there fast. And I keep saying defeat rather than failure because you didn't fail at anything. If you're taking my advice and you're practicing intentionally and with focus, because you never failed yourself if you did the best that you could. And suddenly the thoughts of why bother and why should I try will be answered with because I can become better for myself. And yeah, I guess that's the final point I wanted to make. Like I said, it's getting a little deep there, but just to reiterate, don't practice to become the best at what you do or whatever it is that you're trying to do, or the I guess the field that you're in. Just practice with the focus of becoming the best for yourself, for whatever it is that you're doing.
I love it. That's one heck of a high note to leave on.
Yeah, I hope that makes sense. If it didn't, feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'll explain a little more. So,
well, I love it. I'm going to take everything you said to heart. I'm going to try to apply it to Deaddrawgaming. I'm always trying to improve our website and improve our YouTube videos and our podcasts. I do all the editing for that and our articles. So you're pretty inspirational. Did you know?
No, I appreciate that. I really do.
Well,
I have a wealth of life experiences to pull from. So I guess that's probably where a lot of it comes from.
I love it.
Well, cool, man.
Right.
Well, I guess that's all I got to say. I'm drop some knowledge on you guys. So
it's very
hope it helps.
Yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you so much for coming on, Ryan. I guess lastly, do you have any shout outs you want to give? Anybody you want to thank while you're on the air?
Yeah, I mean, thank the team DDG. I guess my Twitter handle is at itsroostsc, and that's about all I got, man. It was just great being here, and thanks for giving me the time to come on and share my opinions.
We love having people come on to record with us, and you have been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for coming on. I personally appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.
All right. Well, I guess with that, Deaddrawers, thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this, keep your ears open for future podcasts. We got podcasts going up every Wednesday for our normal TCG Like No One Ever Was podcast. But we also like to do patron casts with our patrons, like Ryan, and we like to do competitive casts with our team. We are just starting to get those underway. We've so far done one with Rukan and one with Frank Persick, both members of the pro team and both fantastic guys. Those are great listens. You can catch them on patreon.com, and I think Frank's is still out in the ether. You can just listen to that one for free as well on our SoundCloud. But that's it. So awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on and doing this. Dead Drawers, you've been listening to a special edition podcast with Ryan Turner talking about practicing. And thanks for joining us.
No problem, man. Y'all have a good night.